Giving feedback, especially negative feedback, can be hard, and it falls squarely under the category of a crucial conversation. And that's why I'm really excited to have one of the co-authors of the book, Crucial Conversations, on the podcast today. Stay tuned for a strategic discussion with Emily Gregory. Hi, I'm Karin Reed. I'm a 4-time author, Emmy Award-winning broadcast journalist, and communication expert on helping people to own the room, whether it be a physical one or a virtual one. Welcome to Speaker Dynamics. Emily Gregory, thank you so much for being here.
Oh, thank you, Karin. I'm so excited about our conversation today.
Well, and I am excited that I get to talk to you about something that a lot of people have read. 5 million copies sold. Good Lord, of Crucial Conversations. Like, that's just insane. So when you hear that number, does it just make your mind go, wow?
It is a huge number, but I always think about I hate to take us right down at the beginning, but sometimes I think about the pain behind that number. I think people are reaching out because these conversations are hard and they hurt, and people are looking for a solution. I hope to also say, see how many people we've helped. But sometimes it's amazing to me to just say, people are searching for connection. We're looking for a way to navigate through these, and that 5 million people say, this is important enough for me to buy this and read this. I think that just speaks to how much of a challenge and how much of a pain point there is sometimes.
I love how you centered that. So true. But for the other folks who are not in the 5 million, let's define for our audience what a crucial conversation is.
So we have a really very specific definition of a crucial conversation that we share in the book. And it's a conversation that has 3 elements. So first, it has high stakes, right? It's got to matter. It's got to be important enough to care about. And then the second element is that it has opposing opinions or differing perspectives, right? There's some sense of conflict. There's some sense of difference of I see it one way, you see it somewhere, and we have to navigate that space between. And then the third element, which quite honestly, almost inevitably comes into play between high stakes and opposing opinions, is strong emotions. Because when something's important to me and you see it really different, it's almost just inevitable that I'm going to start getting emotional about it, right? Whether that's frustrated or angry or nervous or scared or whatever that range of emotion is, those emotions come into play. So that's kind of the technical definition of a crucial conversation. I also sometimes think about it as like a crossroads conversation. It's that conversation where you feel like things are going to get better or worse depending on how this goes, right? It's hard to stay the same. And so our hope is, of course, that they get better, but it feels like we're at a little bit of a, is this going to make things better or worse kind of crossroads in those conversations.
Yeah. I will tell you, I evaluated a recent situation that I had where I'm like, do I need to fire a client? Seriously. And I'm like, okay, if I listen to Emily, I should not avoid this conversation. I should actually have a conversation and just, because it was a crossroads, and, had the conversation, not super comfortable with it, but I'm glad that I did it, because now it is a much better relationship, I think, for all parties involved. So thank you for that. Immediate payoff.
Yeah, well, absolutely. And I just want to pick up on a word you said there, because I think that's so important. We say, it's not super comfortable. I actually don't. Crucial conversations aren't probably ever going to be comfortable. They're hard, and nothing makes them easy, and there's no magic wand. And there is probably always a level of discomfort because we have this desire to be in alignment with others, especially people who are important to us. We want to have a connection and be in alignment. And so then when we have that difference, and navigating that is kind of uncomfortable. And I think if we could let go of the goal of being comfortable, we would actually achieve the goal of connecting, right? And being able to have those conversations. And what holds us back, we avoid, is because of that concern about that discomfort. So I think that's a key word that you share there.
Yeah. And kind of coupling with what you just said, this is a podcast designed for leadership communication. And, for some leaders, it's really difficult to get comfortable with being uncomfortable. But, how do you, encourage them to let go of that and to kind of embrace that uncomfortable feeling.
Yeah. I mean, so a couple of things that I would say, sort of some practical advice. First, feel free in a conversation, if you're feeling uncomfortable, to slow it down. Sometimes, especially I think for leaders or who kind of grown up and been successful, it's because they're problem solvers and they're getting things done and we're having this conversation, we're going to end with resolution and it's going to be great. And then suddenly you're in this conversation and it shifts a little bit and you're not really sure and wait, it feels really uncomfortable. And our tendency, because of our past, is to be like, well, I just have to push through and we've got to get this to resolution. It's okay to just slow down and say, wow, you've shared something here with me that's really important. And I actually think I need to take some time to consider. So let's come back to part 2 of this, right? Like, it's okay to take a pause, even a pause for a couple of minutes. I've said sometimes, wow, like I need to think about that. Can I just take a minute, half a minute to just sit in silence and consider it? Sometimes it's I want to come back to this conversation, but so you can always slow down, right? We don't have to rush through these. I think the other thing about this idea of being uncomfortable and being okay with being uncomfortable is we really have to embrace the truth that I am not responsible for your feelings, right? So oftentimes the reason I feel uncomfortable is because you seem uncomfortable or upset or something is going on with you. And then I sort of take that and think, oh my gosh, what have I said? What have I done? Is this okay? Like, am I doing this wrong? And we reflect that back. Now, we'll talk about, I think you can do a lot to create an environment that is conducive for good dialogue, but you have to start with a place of, at the end of the day, I'm responsible for my feelings and you're responsible for yours, right? And so if my discomfort is because you feel uncomfortable, I need to look at that and say, hey, I'm going to do my best to create a good environment here, but I'm not responsible for those feelings. And then the last thing I would say in the face of discomfort is get curious. I think curiosity is one of the best antidotes for being uncomfortable. Curious about in yourself, of self-reflection. Why am I uncomfortable? Why is this making me uncomfortable? What is this triggering for me? What's happening to make me uncomfortable? But also lean in and say, I want to know more, right? Rather than pull back from the discomfort, let's lean into it and really get curious about what are they saying and where is this going and how does this come from? I think asking questions and being curious in those moments of discomfort is one of the best ways to deal with that discomfort.
Those were such great practical tips that I will try to, take in and digest and implement in my life, whether it be that professional conversation or that personal conversation. One of the crucial conversations that I would love to hone in on is giving feedback. That this is challenging for many leaders. And, you talk about, there being kind of 3 parts to delivering that crucial conversation. And just to recap for the audience, the first one is what to do before you open your mouth, how to open your mouth, and then how to finish. Which of these 3 parts do you think people mess up?
It's a good question because we mess all of them up in fairly predictable ways that we
okay.
talk about, right? I think there's sort of predictable ways that we mess up each one of them. But I guess I would say the place that's most noticeable and that hurts us the most is that part where we open our mouths, right? And we start talking and we do it in ways that take the conversation off the rails almost right from the beginning. But underneath that, the reason we're messing up right there is because we actually haven't done the first part, right? We haven't really gotten ourselves ready for the conversation. So it's our lack of preparation that causes that more noticeable problem when we open our mouths. So I know that's kind of a double answer there, but I think that's where you notice it. And the bigger issue is we haven't prepared for that conversation in ways that are effective.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, I think about my spouse, who, when we are preparing for some sort of conversation, with our kids, with our family, he will write things out and diagram it and figure out the way it goes. That is so smart, but something, frankly, I don't often do because I'm kind of like, I'll wing it, it'll work out. But sometimes it doesn't always work out the way I had planned. So I hear you, Emily. I'm going to be better about that. I'm not going to, make fun of him whenever he's doing like a 10-point plan prior to talking to one of our kids.
And I love the 10-point plan. I really do. But I want to just caveat that a little bit. Like, preparation can look different for different people. And it doesn't have to be a diagram. It doesn't have to be a 10-point plan. I think probably the most critical thing that is true for almost all of us in that preparation, and it can take a long time or a short time, is we have to do kind of like a 180 turn. And here's what I mean. about this and why I think it's so imperative. The reason that you're having a feedback conversation is typically because someone else's behavior, someone else's performance, someone else's output, whatever it is, it's causing a pain or a problem for you. Right? You've noticed it. You've got to deal with it. Maybe it's not necessarily you, but other people are coming to you complaining about it, which does make it your problem. And you're like, I got to go deal with this. Because the reality is, if their behavior wasn't causing a problem, you would be having a feedback conversation. So it always starts from that vantage point of me and the pain and problem and irritation and frustration that it's causing for me. And I need to do that 180 switch. That's the most important part of the preparation, is where I switch it and I start thinking about them and what it's doing to and for them and why it matters to and for them. Because if I lean into that conversation with, I need to talk to you, Karin, about this because here's why it's a problem. The problem's going to be, here's why it's a problem for me. And that does not create the foundation for a good conversation. So if you only do one thing in your preparation, it's do that 180 switch and say, I know why I care about this. I know why it's an irritant or a problem or a frustration for me, but why do they care about it? Why is it important for them to have this piece of feedback? What is their behavior causing for them? And I've got to think about it from that other point of view.
I love that because we always talk about wanting to make any message relevant.
Right.
And, that is adding relevancy to them immediately, and, kind of like what's in it for me, which isn't necessarily like this is a positive thing, but this is a potential threat to a positive thing for you. So I think that that's a really critical piece for people to remember. Because we are in this kind of complex communicational landscape now. Sometimes these feedback conversations are not held face to face. More and more often, they're held virtually. This is an area obviously done quite a bit of work in, on my part. But I would love to get your take on how that impacts that feedback conversation. How does it impact the way we prep for it, and how does it impact the way you execute one if it's done virtually?
Yeah. So it's such a great question. And again, I would love to get your tips on that as well, because I just think you're I've learned so much from you about communication in the virtual space. So I'll share a couple ideas, but I would love to learn back from you.
Okay. We'll riff. Okay, go ahead.
Perfect. I mean, so I think there's a couple of things about virtual, and most people go to, right, sort of all the nonverbals and how that's impacted in communication, right? Either we lose them or we get them through video, which of course isn't great. And you're always wondering, like, do I look at my webcam so that I feel like I'm making eye contact? But then if I look at my webcam, I'm not seeing them on camera and I'm missing all their nonverbals. And like, I don't even know what to do here, right? With the strange webcam, and where do I put my eyes, right? So I think that's where we go most often. And what I would say is I've seen it work successfully in all ways. Turn your cameras off, keep your cameras on, look at the camera, look at them. You can do all of that. What I think you have to do is compensate a little bit with words, right? Because we are going to lose some of that nonverbal communication, right? And we're going to lose the fact that I can't control the setting, right? Whereas before, for feedback conversations, if I had a tough message to share, I might be like, hey, let's go out for a walk, or let's go grab a coffee, or let's sit in this, conversational sofa or whatever, right? Like just something really comfortable. And now I lose that. Like, you're at home, I'm at home. It is what it is. So you want to compensate for that with words. And here's what I mean by that. I mean, just literally say things out loud. Like, I wish we could go out for coffee for this conversation right now. That would be so much easier if we could just be having a coffee. Or I wish we could be in a room together, because I just worry that so much is going to be lost in this virtual conversation. And what I really want you to know, and somehow I want you to feel it through my webcam, is that I care about you and I care about this conversation, right? Like, those are scripts you can use. Those are things you can actually say to acknowledge the limitations of the medium and try and communicate what you would have non-verbally. So that's kind of my first one, is recognize what you're missing with the nonverbal and try as much as you can to actually verbalize that.
Yeah. And let me ask you a quick question about that, because so say that, this conversation has to be had and you would much rather have it in person. do you delay it until you can have it in person? Or do you just say, okay, this time is of the essence. I need to have the conversation virtually and make the best of it?
Yeah. I mean, there's a little bit of a cost benefit analysis. So it kind of depends on what that conversation is about. Some of them are urgent and you want to go forward with them. And sometimes you say, nope, I'm going to see this person in 6 weeks and I'm going to have it then. Here's the one thing that I think people overlook when they're doing that analysis for themselves. I think in general, waiting to have a conversation makes it bigger, makes it harder, makes it seem more important, right? So you think about like, if you said, if we were having a team meeting and you did something in that team meeting and I thought that was really not appropriate, what Karin just did there. And I should talk to her about that because I don't want that to keep going. But I know we're getting together in a month, so I'll just wait for it, right? So then a month goes by and we get together and I say, hey, Karin, remember a month ago when you said this in a team meeting? And suddenly it's like,
and I'll be like, what? What did I say?
Oh, you didn't remember. And then it takes on this huge importance that I've been holding on to it for a month, that I've remembered it for a month, that it becomes, you take the molehill and you actually make it a mountain because you delayed it so long. And so I generally think you're going to create a more comfortable, more safe conversation by having it sooner and quicker. And again, I'm thinking about for that other person, right? If I know you've been holding on to something for a month and a half and you didn't talk to me about it, that's going to make it feel really big. When really, if you talked to me about it the next day, it would have felt much smaller.
Yeah, I think that makes a really good point. And, I've experienced that myself and said, okay, I've got to have this conversation now or else it's just going to, it's going to loom larger than it needs to. But it can be addressed pretty quickly and then we can course correct. But, one of the things that I always get questions about is cameras on, cameras off. You kind of alluded to that earlier. And I, coming from, my experiences and working with Dr. Allen, who is the meeting scientist, he and I would espouse that, okay, if you are having a complex conversation or one with emotional heft, you want to opt for the richest medium possible. That would be face to face. If you can't have a face to face, then the second best would be camera on. But I have had some people say, but, sometimes I like to just have it without the camera on because the camera can be distracting. So I would love to know your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I don't think there's a hard and fast rule. So I don't disagree with the idea of let's have it in the richest medium possible. And that really works for me. But I'm also an extrovert. I spend 80% of my time on Zoom. So it's a really comfortable medium for me. And I acknowledge that it's not for others. So two thoughts on this. One, and I will find this for our show notes. I didn't send it over earlier, but a couple of years ago, I read this really interesting study. It was a small study, so we shouldn't generalize too much, but it was enough to get me thinking about it, where they had camera on conversations versus just straight audio conversations with the study population. And then they asked people to say, like, what do you think the other person was thinking, feelings, to sort of intuit, right? Like, how did this conversation go and what were they thinking? And it turned out that the people who were audio only were actually much more accurate in intuiting what the other person was thinking and feeling than the people with the camera. And it was so interesting. And they had some hypotheses around, was it distraction oriented, right? Like if all I can do is listen to you, then I'm going to really listen to you. And I'm going to try and pick up on tones and pauses and all that. I'm really going to listen. Whereas if I've got the camera on and maybe now I'm looking at my computer screen and then I got a notification pop up and, all the different things that happen. So it might have been distraction. It might have been some other things. I don't know, but it was enough to get me thinking about there might be times when actually the focus that we have and my focus on you is what I mean. When I really am just trying to listen and everything else is gone and all I can do is listen to you, that could be really powerful. So I think there's that part of it. The other part that I would suggest, like that I've thought about a lot is, and this kind of ties to a topic I know we're going to get into around creating psychological safety. One of the ways you can create psychological safety for the other person is to give them a measure of control, right? That's where we do things like we ask permission, right? I have some feedback. Would you be willing to hear it, right? Like that shows some respect. It gives the other person a measure of control. I think in a virtual space, camera on, camera off can do that too, right? So I'm often just happy to say, what would you prefer for this conversation? What's more comfortable for you? Camera on, camera off, and let that be the other person's decision, because I think that can create some control for them and some safety for them. And I'm going to be fine whether it's camera on or camera off from my perspective. So that, again, I know that's kind of an equivocation answer, but hopefully a couple of things to think about, right? Like, where am I going to really focus? And can I give that control to the other person to choose?
Yeah, no, I actually did that very thing with a call I'm going to have later today, because I had worked with this person before. I knew that they were not loving the camera in general, even though I did training with this person, and they're in a better place now in terms of being comfortable than they were prior to. But I'm like, I bet we're having this conversation. Let me give the option, and we're doing a phone call, and I'm like, phone call's great, but I also know her pretty well. So I feel like I don't need to be able to read her nonverbals as much, because I can visualize it because I have that history with her. And she also knows me. So there's also that familiarity with the person on the other line, which also often seeds into camera on, camera off. If you don't know somebody at all and you're meeting them for the first time, I always like to have camera on, because then you develop that bank of social nonverbals that you can then inform the conversation when you're not on camera. So it is. You're right. It depends. Right. We'll take that. But can we actually? Can we talk about that psychological? Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, I
Emily,
want
go ahead.
Psychological safety, but I have just one thought and then one question actually for you on a different aspect of your perspective on it. So I will say on camera off. I know some people are like, we should never use virtual backgrounds because they're glitchy and they're lame and whatever. I think if you're having a conversation, I always embrace and whatever people's background is, because you are coming into their space and they get to choose how much of their space they want to share with you. So that's just like one personal thing for me. I'm like, hey, have whatever crazy virtual background you want, because I don't need to be invited into your home or your kitchen or wherever you are. Like that's okay. You can draw that boundary. But here was going to be my question for you, Karin, because this is one that I'm still reading about and trying to navigate through if there is an answer to it. I think in virtual remote work, we more often have to schedule the feedback conversation, which is tricky, right? You send an email and say, I have some feedback. Can we talk? That doesn't seem like a particularly great way to go, right? And so I've been playing with this, and again, kind of trying to read the literature on what we're learning about it. And obviously, if there are informal message like Slack Messenger or IM, and you can just be like, hey, it looks like you're on. Can I catch you for a quick minute? That's easier than I'm going to send you an email and put a meeting invite on your calendar that says, I have negative feedback to give to you, which of course you'd never say it like that. But just trying to figure out, how do you navigate, I think the invitation for the conversation is actually so much trickier in remote. And it actually is what sets up some of those conversations to fail from the beginning. Whereas when we were all in the office together, you could walk down the hall and be like, hey, can I grab you for a minute? It looks like you're free, wanted to talk to you and pull you in. So I just wonder if you have thoughts, and not to put you on the spot, but you've done so much work in this.
No, you're not putting me on the spot.
About the invitation to the conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. So if you think back to the pandemic, what happened during, along with a lot of other things, was that there was this explosion of meetings. And there's a lot of, science behind that, but some of it was a result of, we miss personal connection. This seems to be the only way that we can get that personal connection is through meetings. So then our days were just full of meeting bloat. And there has been a recalibration to some degree on that, where there is a recognition that it's not healthy to be in back-to-back-to-back meetings all day long. Still some of that going on, but not quite as bad as it was during the pandemic. But I think that there are some habits that were created during that time that made people reflexively put a calendar invite, on somebody's schedule for any sort of interaction. And you're right, it elevates the importance of that meeting higher perhaps than it needs to be. So the invitation is a little bit tricky. What I tend to default to, if I don't have, some way of reaching out to them via Teams or Slack, is I'll just shoot them a quick, hey, I'd love to grab 15 minutes of your time. What works for you? Phone call's fine. Because then it feels less threatening. And if they're like, hey, yeah, just give me a call, then I know I can pick up the phone. So I feel like that is helpful for the less formal feedback conversations. If I'm doing something that requires more formality, what I typically would do is, not label it as negative feedback session or even feedback session, but, whether, make it a little bit less scary, I guess, and just say, catch up, update, talk, whatever it is, just to block some time out so that you don't have the angst prior to that call. But I know for me, I'm sure your schedule is the same. Like my calendar is ugly. And I used to be really opposed to using something like a calendar link, find time on my calendar. But I do that because I'm like, if I don't, somebody else is going to gobble that time up and I'm never going to have the conversation. So sometimes you're forced into it just by virtue of trying to, create space for it to happen. There's not a lot of white space on my calendar. And so, I have to kind of resort to that scheduling tool, which I don't like. I feel like it's less personal. But if I don't know somebody well enough to, just say, hey, just give me a call when you have a minute, I'll do that. I've gotten into texting too, Emily, where I'll text, where I'll say, hey, do you have a minute? And that way you're asking permission. And then you can have either the video conversation or the phone conversation.
Yeah. I love that. It helps a lot. And I'll tell you one thing that I have long talked to leaders about, and I think in some ways it's harder, but maybe even more important in this virtual space is, let me go to the great Stephen Covey's emotional bank account metaphor. At least that's where I learned the metaphor, if people are familiar with it, right? But it's this idea that like we all have this emotional bank account, and in our relationships, we're making deposits and withdrawals, right? And so if you and I are having a relationship, there are always inevitably going to be things that I do that deposit into your bank account. I'm going to give you praise, and I'm going to call out when you do great things, and I'm going to help you out at times, and I'm making these deposits. And then because we're humans and we're not perfect, I will at some point do something that hurts your feelings, or I'll say something abruptly or whatever it will be, and I'll make a withdrawal, right? And that's okay. Like that's just real life. But the key is in the healthiest relationships, we keep a pretty good, healthy, positive balance, right? And I think what's happened in virtual, what I've seen happen is, we are making the effort when we need to say, hey, do you have a minute? I need to talk to you about something. And here's my feedback for you. But we're not saying, hey, do you have a minute? I need to talk to you about something. I wanted to tell you what a great job you did on this project. Like we're not doing, we're just making withdrawals and not as many of the deposits. And so what happens inevitably, and leaders have created this sometimes for themselves, the only time I reach out to someone on my team and say, hey, do you have a minute to talk, is if I'm going to deliver some piece of negative feedback. And then I don't even need to say negative feedback. They learn that when Emily says, hey, do you have a minute? Oh, no, here it comes, right? And so I have just been trying to be really conscious of saying, I need to say, hey, do you have a minute? I want to tell you something you did that was so great. Not in a manipulative way and not in a false way, but just to remember, I am nurturing these relationships and I need to do that work so that when it comes time to have the feedback conversation, we have a healthy relationship and that feedback's going to land so much better.
Yeah. And we are getting close on time, but if I stick to my 30-minute rule, but I knew this would happen, Emily. There's so much to talk about. But this kind of, it flew. So, but this does get back to like that whole idea of creating that psychological safety, because in order to have an honest conversation, in a feedback session, it needs to be there. So you've given some really good tips so far. It seems like, making sure that you are doing deposits as well as withdrawals from the emotional bank. But is there anything else you would kind of add to that for the psychological safety component?
Yeah, let me give you a couple of key ones. First, share your good intent. Our work has found that people don't become defensive or feel unsafe because of what you're saying, the content of your message. They become defensive or feel unsafe because of their perception of your intent, right? So it's not that it's what you're saying, it's why they think you're saying it. Their perception of your intent is going to be the number one factor that's going to create or destroy safety for that other person. And honestly, human beings, I think we are like hardwired, right? We have that negativity bias. We are hardwired. In the face of uncertainty, we're going to assume the worst. So if you don't tell me what your intent is, either through your nonverbals or now through direct verbals, right? If you don't tell me what your good intent is, I'm going to assume it's bad, right? Because that's going to be self-protective for me. So you want to start every feedback conversation with your good intent. Why are you here to have this conversation? What do you want for them? What is your good intent for that other person? And I think it's important to realize, because I've seen too many people practice this and get it wrong. Good intent is not the same as a compliment. It's not the same as appreciation. Those are great. I love compliments. I love appreciation. I love it when you say, thank you, Emily, you did a great job. But that's not the same as you saying, I want to have this conversation because I care about you and your career. And I think there's something that might be holding you back. And I want to give you some feedback about that. That's a statement of my good intent. And so you want to start with that statement of good intent. The next thing I would say, we talked about asking permission. That's a great way to, again, show respect for the other person and create safety. But then get there quickly, I think, and be super clear about it. The worst thing in a feedback conversation is when someone just takes forever to get there and they're like, and then maybe, and it was kind of like, and I just think, and if you could, and you're like, what are they even saying? You want to be super clear. And what we teach is to describe the gap. This is probably my number one tip for everyone. And it creates so much safety. If I'm just really clear that I'm coming to this conversation, not to talk about a problem or an issue, I'm coming to describe a gap. The gap between what I was expecting and what I've observed. I was expecting that you would do this in the meeting. What I saw was this. Can you help me understand? You get there quickly and you clearly describe that gap, and then invite that other person into the conversation. That is going to do so much to create safety. And then my last one, I know I did more than I said I would, is it's okay. It's where we started. You got to be comfortable yourself. If you bring all your anxieties and all your issues and all your angst to this conversation, it is going to create a heightened tension for them. So be comfortable. Know that you've done your preparation. Be clear about what you're here for. Share your good intent. Describe that gap and just be comfortable in that conversation yourself. That will create a lot of safety for the other person.
And you just created a lot of value for the audience in 3 minutes. So that was amazing.
27 boom.
Okay. So, and I'm okay. We're a little over, but I feel like I should not be so stringent with my time that, I'm cutting off good stuff. So, the one thing I do like to have for each week and each episode is to, leave people with one big takeaway. What would be the one big takeaway for your audience?
Oh, can I do two, Karin? Just because it's...
Of course. Yes.
I mean, I'm always
fine.
Right. So two takeaways, right, is I think you have to realize that avoiding that conversation over time erodes trust. The best thing for a conversation, or the best thing in a relationship, is that I know I can trust you to tell me what you really think. And it's uncomfortable and it's hard and maybe I don't love it in the moment, but that trust that gets built in that relationship when we can be honest with one another is just huge. So every time you're trying to make that, should I talk about this? Should I not talk about this? Realize that you are in that moment making a decision about what kind of a relationship you want to have with that person. And if you want a relationship, you're going to have to be honest and develop that trust. And then my second one, and this probably goes to it, is I think at the end of the day, the number one key to having a feedback conversation well is so easy. You just have to care about the other person. It is as simple as that. If you truly care about them, not about you, not about the issue, not about the problem, but I care about you, that will come through in your conversation. Joseph Grenny, who's one of my co-authors on the book, says, connection is the goal. Accountability is the fruit, right? If our goal is to connect in that conversation and I want to hear and understand from you and share it with you that I care, we're going to build a relationship in which we will have accountability to one another, right? And we will close those gaps. But if we go in with the goal being accountability, that is punitive and that is hard. So connection should be your goal and accountability will be your fruits.
And we have connected on a really important topic today, Emily. Thank you so much. You have such great wisdom and strategies and tips on this topic and many more in Crucial Conversations. So I really appreciate you sharing some of them today.
Oh, well, I've loved being here. I mean, the work you are doing, Karin, and how you have helped myself and so many of us navigate through these crazy past 4 or 5 years has just been so crucial for all of us. So thank you for the work you're doing.
Oh, stop. Thanks, Emily. So I knew this conversation would go over because not only do I thoroughly enjoy any conversation with Emily Gregory, but she also has just so much wisdom to share that I knew that we would try to pack as much as we possibly could in a half hour. It went a little bit over. Sorry about that. But here's the good news. If you have liked what you've heard, we have some additional conversation that did not fit even in the segment that we just shared with you. It's in the form of bonus content. It's a little mini episode, and it's tackling the topic of how to deal with the situation where you're giving feedback and you know it's not going to be received well, how to mitigate that potential outburst. It is not to be missed. She gives a great framework on how to handle that. So if you want to check it out, I'd encourage you to do it. It's actually at speakerdynamics.com/bonus content. Once again, it's speakerdynamics.com/bonus content. And you'll learn that framework on how to deal with that challenging conversation when you're giving feedback to somebody who you know is going to just freak out when they hear it. So thank you so much, folks, though, for listening to this episode. Until next time.